Welcome to this video lesson, the second installment of Introduction to the United States Government. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. So today we're going to focus a little bit more in detail about the founders themselves. But before we do that, I want to look at what the core values historically have been portrayed of America, of the United States, right? These are the core values. We left off on part one, just listing these core values. So just to refresh your memory, here they are. I'm going to go through each of them. Now I want to make a little disclaimer. These are ideals, okay? I am in no way arguing that these, in fact, we live up to them. We don't. At various points in our history, we've done sometimes a better job than others at living up to them, but these are goals. And this isn't to say that they've always worked out for every person or every group of people throughout our history. But these are the values and goals that were espoused by our founders and that many Americans up until I think fairly recently have agreed upon, even if they agreed that it didn't apply to everyone as it should, that these values should apply to everyone and they should exist. So these are those values, and we're going to talk about what they are. So individual liberty, right? Individual liberty, political equality. Those are two of the most important ones, and it's the ones that get the most lip service, the idea that each person in the United States is an individual and has autonomy. We have sovereignty. We can determine our own destinies. We don't have some authority telling us, no, you must do this job. No, you must live here. No, you must only go here and you're not allowed to go there, right? The idea is that we have this individual liberty, or that we should. That is a goal. That is an ideal that we should have. And the reason that this is important is this because of this concept called natural rights. And we're going to talk more about natural rights as the course moves forward. But there are three of those natural rights. There's life, liberty, and property. Property meaning that nobody gives you property, but whatever property you have and you own, you are allowed to do with it as you please. That government can't tell you to do that. Now, why is this important? Because before United States government, all rights came from the king, from the monarch, from whoever was in control of that society. The only rights you got were what the king said you could have. So if the king said you couldn't have any rights, you didn't have any. Well, this idea states that nobody gives you these rights. You're born. You were born as a human being. You exist. Therefore, you have these rights. Government doesn't give them to you. That's the important distinction. That's the important change that makes United States government interesting, because our system of government was the first time where we actually said this. Like we said, no, government isn't giving you your right to life. You have it. Government's job is to not take it away from you and to step in if somebody else is trying to do that. So that's where what makes the United States different. And these are rights that all people have because we exist, because we are human. And there's this idea of political equality, the idea that we're all equal. We may not be equally talented or equally rich or, equal in every way. But the idea is that as participants in our society, we are equal to each other. No one citizen is more important than another. This is a goal, an ideal. And this idea of popular sovereignty, that political power, political authority is vested with us, not in the government. The president can run around and do whatever he wants. The Congress can run around and whatever, but they don't have power. And we forget that, I think. Their power, they borrowed it from us. We lent it to them when we sent them to Washington. And we can take it back. It's not theirs. They don't own that. We do. It's ours. We simply let them borrow it for a while. But if they're not doing what we want, they lose that ability. They're like renting power is what they're doing, but they've convinced us that they are the power. That's no. They're renting the power, right? So the idea is that we are all supposed to be politically equal to each other. And here's where a lot of divisive issues happen, because we have this need to balance minority rights with majority rule. A lot of people talk about, well, in previous elections, this candidate won the popular vote, so the majority, they wanted them in, but this other guy won instead because he won the electoral college, right? And there was a lot of, people being upset about that. Well, sometimes majority rule, it can be good, but sometimes it can be bad. Like, for example, in the 1950s, the majority of the United States was in favor of segregation, right? Which is, today we would say that's awful, that's terrible, segregation is disgusting, it's awful, right? But in that case, the majority ruled and segregation remained in force for quite some time until some Supreme Court cases came through and got rid of it happily. So there's this balancing act that has to happen in a society as large and diverse as ours, this balance of minority rights versus majority rule. And it's not something we always get quite right, but we do our best. And then the concept of economic rights is also an important core value in the United States. Our right to own property and control the property that we own. So that's important. So now let's get into a little bit more specific discussion of the founding itself, right? So why did the founders choose a republic? If you recall, in the previous video lesson, we talked about the difference between a direct or pure democracy and a republic, okay? In a republic, we choose our representatives. They make decisions for us at a more central location. The founders chose a republic for two primary reasons. One, it was impractical. We were simply too large and too spread out and too diverse to have every citizen participate in every decision the government needed to make. Nothing would happen. Government would grind to a halt. We would never be able to agree on everything. Also, we had this fear, our founders specifically had this fear of mob rule, of this mob mentality. They called it the tyranny of the majority. Basically, our founders recognized some unsavory aspects of human nature. Number one being that the majority will sacrifice the minority at every opportunity. You cannot count on the majority to account for the interests and rights of the minority. They will sacrifice it for their own purpose. And a democracy allows that sacrifice to happen. Not only does it allow it, it's built into the system that it will happen. It definitely happens. It always happens. So our founders were concerned about this tyranny of the majority, and they wanted to build in some safeguards to try to prevent that tyranny of the majority. Does it always work? No, it doesn't. But the thought was there to try to prevent as much as possible that tyranny of the majority from happening. Now, another note I want to make, role of the citizen. Here's the catch, being in a free society. You have to think. You have to participate. Decisions are made by those who show up. Okay, you have to participate. And people who don't vote, sure, you have a right to complain. It's a free country. You can speak your mind. But if you're not participating in the process, you are taking away your primary method of fixing things, of voting people out of office who are doing a bad job and voting different people in that you prefer, that you think would do a better job, or of running for office yourself. In an authoritarian society, in a closed society, a society like North Korea, it's very easy. It's not hard. You don't have to think. The government thinks for you. They tell you, this is what you think, this is what you believe, this is what you will do, this is who you will talk to, this is what you can and can't say. So there's no thinking, there's no research, it's done for you. The government does it for you. In a free society, that's your job. You must do that. And if you don't, someone or several someones will step in and do that thinking for you and perhaps convince you to do things that are not in your best interest. So the role of the citizen is very important here. In a free society, you have rights, but you also have responsibilities. And if you don't live up to the responsibilities of being informed and paying attention and being an active participant in your government, those rights will disappear because people will come in and take it. So that's an important prerequisite for enjoying freedom. It's a very important part of that. So let me go into some historical context here. I'm getting my little box. Okay, so some historical context as we get into the founding. I want to start with the scientific revolution. You do not need to memorize these definitions. I just want to kind of give you a quick play-by-play of how our founders arrived at their conclusions. So before the scientific revolution, you have this era of church and king monarch control, right? The church actually controlled the kings in a lot of cases. So whatever the church said is what you did. And the reason for it was because they said so. There was no thinking, there was no choice. It was the church said this, and you will do it, or you will be excommunicated. You'll be kicked out of the church. You won't be able to go to heaven. If in extreme cases you were burned at the stake or killed for being a heretic. And a lot of people were over this. After 1,500 years of this, they about had it. And the scientific revolution started, and they looked at what was happening in the world, and they said, the church says this, and the king says this over here, but I'm seeing and I'm observing all this other stuff, and it doesn't match with what they're saying. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to use my observations, and I'm going to experiment, and I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to explore, and I'm going to find my own answers. I'm not just going to accept this one. I'm going to look at something else, right? So that begins the start of true science, of the birth of the scientific method, of scientific exploration. We start to understand chemistry and physics and biology. And it was just this explosion of knowledge, right? And because of that explosion, that scientific explosion, you get these guys, these thinkers from what's called the Enlightenment. And those people wanted to take the scientific method and apply it to human society. And they said, if we can understand the natural world like this, we can use reason and the scientific method and empiricism, and we can figure out how to solve our societal problems and our political problems. And one of these really important guys who was an Enlightenment thinker was this guy, John Locke. He's the one you have to know. This guy you got to know, because he's going to show up on exams. I'm telling you, he's going to show up on exams. Whatever exam you're taking, he's showing up. He was the most important political philosopher to the founders, and they read just about everything he wrote, and they applied a lot of his ideas to our founding. So that's why those two guys are important, or that guy in particular is important, and why you need to just have a sense of some context here. So, okay, now that we're talking about the Enlightenment, I want you to have a little bit better idea of what it was. We would look if you compare our modern morals and customs and ideas to the Enlightenment, we would look and think that a lot of these guys are backwards. Minorities didn't have a large role in the Enlightenment. Women had a larger role than they ever had previously, but they didn't have a very large role either. But for the time, it was very progressive. It was all about having a rationale, using reason to figure things out. It was very humanistic. They believed in humanity. Sorry, cell phone went out there. So the important thing to remember about the Enlightenment thinkers is they believed in human capacity to achieve greatness. That we could achieve greatness in and of ourselves. We didn't need a church or a king to help us do that. If they just got out of our way, we could do great things. They believed in us as a species. And that was important. We have a lot of optimism about mankind's abilities. And these were their key beliefs. They distrusted tradition and revealed religion because it was because I said so, right? They wanted to know, well, why? Why do you say so? What's your motive for saying that? What is the virtue of doing what you're telling me to do? Why is it good, right? They believed that the scientific method could be applied to society, and that society can get better if we experiment and try different things. We need to be open to trying different methods to make our society better, and that we're naturally good, and that we need to focus less on the afterlife and more on the earth right now, on what we're experiencing now. How can we make society better for the people living in it? So the philosophers were the guys who were practicing the Enlightenment. These were the thinkers, right? So they were interested in addressing a lot of people. They didn't want to just talk to a small group of people like the kings and the nobility, the dukes and whatnot. They wanted to address a lot more people in society, other classes of people. They were committed to reform, to changing what types of government had existed in the past. They celebrated the scientific revolution, and they wanted to apply that science to society. Okay. So there's your brief intro to historical context there for you about the political beliefs of our founders. So I'm going to pause the video right here, and in the next video, we're going to take an in-depth look at that actual political philosophy now that we understand a little bit better how they got to that point. So I hope you learned what you needed to, and I'll see you in the next video.